Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for April 8th, 2024. I'm going to be discussing today the larger war that's in the works. What we're seeing now is a possibility of a shift underway in the Gaza attack by Netanyahu's Israel Defense Forces. They may be withdrawing, actually they seem to be withdrawing a large number of troops, but it's not clear yet what this means. It's definitely a response to the revulsion of the attack on the World Central Kitchen aid workers. But it's also a response to what the International Court of Justice has described as plausible genocide being conducted by Israel in Gaza. And it's clear, to say the least, that this is a disproportionate response to the October 7th attack on Israel. Now, we've seen Biden express deep displeasure to Netanyahu and to Israel. Also, the outcry over the killing of the World Central Kitchen workers was quite strong and has led to large demonstrations, including in Israel. So you also have the UN Human Rights Commission call for a shut-off of arms shipments to Israel. So there's a building consensus that this policy toward the Palestinians in Gaza must stop. However, Netanyahu is still insisting that the Rafah invasion will take place. It will just be postponed. And the speculation is, does this mean some rest for the troops? Does it mean regrouping? Is it a change in tactics or whatever? Now, meanwhile, I want to say that the response to the Israel's plausible genocide is not adequate. One example of this is the outcry over the World Central Kitchen aides who were killed. What about the 32,000 plus Palestinians who have been killed? Why is it that these 7 sparked such outrage? Maybe because they are white? Well, what about the toleration of a government run by extremists who are still intent on ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population of the so-called State of Israel? So I think there's a lot more here that has to be looked at, but minimally it requires an increase in the outcry against the policy of the government of Israel and the policy of Western governments in supporting them with arms and money and political protection. Now, simultaneously, there's still the matter of Ukraine to resolve. What about the NATO plans to continue the proxy war against Russia? These are being discussed in every nation of Europe, the idea that it's necessary to have a NATO military buildup to become, quote, war ready, unquote. Warnings coming from psychos like Victoria Nuland, who said there are big surprises coming for Russia. And of course, this occurred at the time just before the Crocus murder rampage conducted against the people of Russia. Also, there were, over the weekend, drone strikes on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. What kind of nonsense is this? What dangerous game is being played by the desperate leaders in Kiev? But all of this points to the danger of a much larger war. And one of the ominous signs of this was the missile attack on the Iran consular office in Damascus, which killed a top general and his aides. And that this reflects something that's identified by us and by others as the Breakaway Ally Scenario. That is, that Israel would go wildly into an escalation that would cause a reaction, in this case from Iran. Then Israel would say to the United States, well, now you must react to this. That's called the Breakaway Ally Scenario, where Israel acts in a completely irresponsible and dangerous way, provoking a bigger war, including for the whole region, and then saying to the U.S., okay, you come in and clean it up. But it's even bigger than that. And it's necessary to look at what the real target of the war hawks is. The war hawks working for their corporate-controlled military, industrial, financial complex bosses who run the Unipolar Order. Their goal is to destroy the BRICS, the organization that was set up by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and is now expanding very dramatically as in opposition to the collapsing Western financial system. Now, why are they out to destroy the BRICS? Well, what the BRICS represent is a potential for a new coordinated paradigm of economic development based on an alliance of sovereign nations, which, by the way, the global corporate oligarchs don't want. They don't want sovereign nations, but an alliance of sovereign nations committed to what my colleague Paul Gallagher identified or described as, quote, mutual economic, technological, and scientific development, unquote. Now, this is what was identified more than 5 decades ago by Lyndon LaRouche as an economic system to replace the geopolitical divide and conquer strategy of the Anglo-American Empire. It's this potential represented by the BRICS in the discussion of using at present national currencies to settle imbalances, to begin to move outside the dollar system, outside of SWIFT. And it was provoked by the West's policy. This has been put into somewhat higher speed development because of the way the West has used sanctions and other weapons of economic warfare and support of the International Monetary Fund against the nations of the global South. Now, it's this potential represented by the BRICS that's the ultimate target of the US NATO-directed military operations. And it explains the refusal to recognize and accept the defeat of the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, which is really nothing more than an effort to use the Ukrainian population, and I should say to use up the Ukrainian population, in a vain attempt to weaken Russia. And it also explains the escalation in Southwest Asia, using Israel in Gaza as a trigger mechanism for a powder keg. Now, that's what the Breakaway Ally Scenario is all about. Think about what happened since last August with the development of the BRICS as an alternative to the existing international monetary system. Well, the new members include the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. All of these are nations which are threatened by a war that would be triggered by the Breakaway Ally Scenario. All of them. And we see it with the discussion of cracking down on Egypt, the whole question of war against Iran, and so on. What happens if this war expands? The whole region goes up. Now, what you have to then identify is that in the building of the BRICS, the role of Russia and China has been key, especially on the question of infrastructural development, but also the Chinese diplomatic initiative to resolve the problems between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which seemed insurmountable. Sunni versus Shia, the classic example of a clash of civilizations in an inter-Muslim rivalry that could lead to chaos in the region as a whole. The Chinese intervened, they worked something out, and as a result, this is a core principle of the potential to use diplomacy and economic development to overcome the impulse toward tribalism and regional war. Now, this is what the pro-Biden allies in the Democratic and Republican Party are targeting, the potential to overcome these tensions through diplomacy, through economic development, to create a different world order from that which is intended of a war of the jungle of each against all. And so this is what the target is. Now, I'm going to be giving you links to two things. One is the April 13th Oasis Plan Conference, which is going to be a discussion of Lyndon LaRouche's approach to using big infrastructure, large projects, an investment credit policy to create the basis for making the deserts bloom, which would go a long way toward resolving all of the conflicts that have existed in the Southwest Asia since the British moved in at the end of the 19th century. So there's an April 13th, there's an Oasis Plan Conference, and it's online, and you can sign up for it at the link I'm giving you. Secondly, there's a link to the discussion of the Manhattan Project this last Saturday, which included a section of Helga Zepp-LaRouche's opening comments to the International Peace Coalition meeting last Friday, and my comments on the Breakaway Ally Scenario. So I'd urge you to look at these things, sign up for the conference, but think big. The larger war is not about Putin being bad or the Hamas being violent terrorists. It's about reimposing the axioms of a world order based on a Malthusian control by an imperial force over nations of the world that are striving for sovereign economic development. And if you're an American who believes that sovereignty is the key to solving these problems, don't fall for this war policy, which is aimed at destroying the idea of sovereign nations and forcing them to knuckle under to the demands of a global central banker's dictatorship. So thanks for joining me today. Check out our links, and I'll be back with you tomorrow.